almost a century ago, Magritte made the painting Ceci n'est pas une pipe, This is not a pipe, which of course was a painting of a pipe. And the idea, I believe, in him making that painting was to make the point that a painting of a pipe will never be a pipe, it will always be a painting. In other words, in a sense, every realist or narrative painting is second-hand. That is, it is a picture of something. That sounds like a statement of the obvious, but the experience of the painting can be compared to living with a snapshot of a vacation rather than going on the vacation. It is extremely second-hand and is simply a narration about what happened rather than a direct experience, you might say. Magritte was known as a surrealist, and the surrealists had an interesting take, an interesting manifesto on their art. And that is that their goal, their manifesto, was to give the experience of the psyche, to chart, you might say, the experience of what it is like to be in the human mind, to make paintings like a mirror, in a sense, of the experience of what it is to be human. By 1967, when postmodernism came in, that really was the hippie genre of art, you might call it that. Narrative art was absolutely forbidden. It was suddenly seriously regarded as not allowed. So you may say that the seeds that Magritte sowed and that the existentialists sowed early in the 20th century suddenly bore fruit throughout all the art colleges and throughout the family, as we call it, of the art world, the curators, critics, and major galleries. Narrative art, paintings that looked like things, were suddenly seriously forbidden. And I think that art is always true. That is, if the artist is the voice in the wilderness, the one that speaks the truth, the looking glass of society that reflects how society is doing, I think that it is always accurate, that the mirror never lies in a certain way. So I believe that historically, when postmodernism came along, Andy Warhol kind of running with the flag, that it came after a century of wars, a rise in the possibilities of war photography in the media, crime scene photography increasingly, and pornography. In other words, a brutalized society, and a society that, this is me just talking now, that had perhaps lost faith in authority. So a society that no longer wanted to be dictated to. And the reflection of that in art was that no longer would they allow narrative to prescribe what they should think about art. Instead, they wanted art to simply engage them to have their own view. That is, a whole period, half a century now, of subjective art. In theory, subjective. I think postmodernism was in fact enforced in the art colleges and by the family of curators, critics, and colleges, just like any other period was, just like the old academies in France. So in the meantime, as all this was happening, abstraction had been born and was emerging to become very serious and very central in the art world in the 20th century. So we regard it as a brand new thing, but of course it isn't, because we've experienced abstraction in music since time immemorial. Music is fundamentally abstract, isn't it? It may have, you might say, narrative words, it may have lyrics which are telling a story and are therefore narrative, but the music itself is always profoundly abstract. Not only that, we do know how to interpret it. When you hear a lead guitar playing a very well-written riff, or the lead violin in an orchestra playing something, you understand it. Your mind and heart understand what it is saying. And yet, the public generally throw their arms up when they see abstraction and pure abstraction and proclaim that they have no idea what it means, what it's about, when in fact for centuries we have dealt with abstraction in music. Music and art are completely linked. They are married, in fact, via Pythagoras, who created the laws of composition 500 years before Christ. My childhood was a frightening experience. It scared me terribly, and so I chose, throughout 40 years of my career, I chose to make safe art. The narratives themselves were not at all safe. They dealt with intimate and vulnerable stories from my childhood, but the process itself and the paintings themselves were, in this sense, second-hand. They were strictly narrative, so they were not the experience of what happened to me, but the vacation photograph. You were gazing into a story about what happened rather than experiencing what happened. I couldn't stand to experience what happened during that career. But early in 2013, I realized that you actually can combine realistic imagery and abstract devices in a marriage, again, whose purpose is to create an experience that engages the viewer with the psyche. Back to the Surrealist Manifesto. To engage them with the psyche directly. No longer pictures of things that happened, but rather understandable experiences akin to the experience of being human, what is going on in the human mind. There are, in this style, this marriage of realism and abstraction, there are many devices that I've found work very well, like the fragmentation or destruction of the human body. If you literally slash paint across it or allow the background to invade the human body in this, it increases empathy with it. Ties into some very interesting research done into the concept of the uncanny valley, the drop-off in empathy as things increasingly resemble human beings in art. Halos around the bodies really harken back to the Japanese flatness that the Impressionists followed. There was a great flatness and lines around all forms in Japanese art that was quickly followed by the Impressionists, and is a statement of intent, I think. It simply states, we're not trying to fool you. Yes, ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is a pipe. And for me, it is a statement of honesty and integrity in these paintings. There are symbols around the heads of many of my figures. Now, this is only a hunch, but I would suggest to you that we never see anyone without that we see symbols around their heads. In other words, we never see a single person without that we have theories about who they are, how good they are, what they think, what they believe. We have theories about people. We do, in fact, surround them with symbols and interpretations of who they are. I insert words and numbers because I'm interested in the kind of suggestion that they give. My goal is to not be prescriptive or narrative in order to keep the experience direct, not a photograph of, but the experience of. But words and numbers are sufficiently abstracted in a way that I can include them and it seems to work. This is hearkening back to R.B. Kitaj and Hockney in that early period in the 60s during the birth of postmodernism, when they found they could include those with very good results. There are abstract objects and gestures, abstract gestures, just like in rock music and the lead violin in an orchestra. But the things that cannot be changed are the visual space and perspective, and the forms of bodies must remain precisely correct, and any kind of visual space has to be correct and believable and precise. It seems to me that you cannot mess with too much if you're going to combine realism and abstraction. Back to Magritte's concept, my goal is to not be second-hand, but to be direct in creating an experience.